Welcome back to this week's episode of Mystery Garage. In today's episode, it is episode 5 on the Jetta VR6 swap project. And in today's episode, we are going to finally start this thing. Now, I can tell you from experience, it's not without a fair shake of problems. So let's jump right into today's episode and show you what's going on. Let's do it. Alright, welcome back to today's episode. Now we're going to jump right into this project because there is a ton of stuff to get you guys caught up on. And thank you very much for all you guys' support last week. I hope you guys saw my post, but unfortunately one of my kids ended up catching a bug and ended up needing to have a little bit of my week last week, being dad, inside the house, supporting them to get a little bit better. But throughout that week, I was able to put together some footage and get some work done on the car, kind of after I put them to bed or any time throughout the week I had a little bit of time. So you're going to see some of the time lapses, some of the footage I'm going to show you now is kind of jumping from day to day. You can tell the lighting is different, whether it's day or night when I'm filming it. But we ended up getting to the point where we are ready to almost fire this thing. And it wasn't without some problems, but we'll get to that when the time comes. First off, I'm going to show you guys, we ended up last week's episode ending where I still needed the tank to fuel pump seal. I didn't actually have that, so I ordered that. So we'll hop into the time lapse. I'll show you guys me installing that as well as wiring in the fuel pump. So let's get to it. All right, so what you guys saw me doing was the fuel pump is all now in properly with the seal. Lines are all hooked up. Fuel pump wiring is also done. Last episode I did mention how I was maybe going to use the, because this car used to be a diesel, using the water separator harness and trying to power the fuel pump. I actually abandoned that whole idea and wired it properly. So I wired it as if it was a gas right to the proper plug-in in the ECU, the CE2, and it's wired all correctly. So now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to put this trunk back together. Then we're going to go ahead and prime the pump and start sending some fuel up to the front. All right, trunk's done, just needs a quick vacuum, but let's move up front. Yes! We got fuel. A little bit. Nice. In. Okay, now we will prime that again, prime the whole fuel system. No leaks, that's good. See if she cranks. Woohoo! All right, so here's the point in the video where I hit problem number one. As you can hear in the video, I turn the key a few times, absolutely nothing happens. And your mind immediately goes to the worst case scenario, but remember, this is a fairly in-depth project. Not only have we changed pretty much the entire engine wiring, we've changed the engine, transmission, drive shafts, fuel tank, exhaust. Everything's been gone through, so at this point of your build, intend on there being some minor issues when it goes to start the car. So this is definitely issue number one. Obviously we have power in the system because when I turned the key, the pump was priming just fine, but I wasn't getting a signal out to the starter to start it up. So jump into the engine bay, check the starter wiring, everything seems to check out. I pulled off the signal wire to see if I was getting a signal, and I wasn't. So into the electrical system I went, pulled the fuse box down, checked all my connections, everything seemed to be fine. But what I didn't do is there's a portion that interrupts the signal for the starter for things like a neutral lockout or a immobilizer if you had one, something like that. So I had to quickly throw a fuse in there, connected that up, everything worked great at that point. I was able to turn the key and I was getting rotation. So then I turned the camera back on. It was like actually a couple hours later now that I had sorted all that out, and I made this footage for you guys. Oh man, the pain and the frustration, you can hear it in my sigh. It's definitely something you can relive over and over again. But guys, if you've been in this position before, you spend a great deal of time and effort on a project, and to not have it go your way, I spent a couple hours getting it to crank. We have crank, we know we have fuel, You know, you hope you turn the key the very next time and you're going to get fire, and not having fire is just such a demotivating point in time. But remember, builds like this have ebbs and flows. You're going to have good times and bad times, and challenges and times of success. So you got to keep powering through it. You know, I obviously the very first next thing to check was spark, because I had air and I had fuel. Did I have spark? I pulled off a spark plug wire, grabbed the spark plug. Yeah, I had spark. So it gets to a situation where now it's something a lot more involved. So I kind of was at the end of my rope for that day. I was pretty tired. You don't want to get into things when you're tired, you're not thinking straight. So I left the car alone. I can't remember if I got into the car the very next day. I think I was with the kids the next day, what have you. I can't remember exactly how it played out. But nevertheless, came out, spent a couple more hours on the car, and I couldn't quite figure it out. Everything seemed to check out from what I can see. And so I did the next best thing, which I highly recommend that you guys do, is reach out to a friend. Have a friend come by before you start diving into big things, taking things apart, getting too crazy. Before you get to that point, call a friend, have another set of eyes come look at the car, make their opinions, make their judgments without you telling them what you might think it is, and see what they come up with. Because in this case, it worked, and thank you so much for all your help. Had some friends come over, and we actually pinpointed something that I've never dealt with before in this type of situation, but ended up being a fuel injector issue. My fuel injectors on this car were all getting the signal, which you need a special tool to check, by the way. But luckily enough, one of the guys had those tools, checked the injectors, they were getting signal, everything seemed to check out, but we weren't getting fuel. So that means injectors throughout the rebuild of the engine or what have you. I don't really know the history on the injectors themselves, because again, this isn't my car or my build, but it turns out that the injectors just weren't squirting. They had locked up or seized up or what have you. Maybe one or two of them were, but it was time to, we knew they were getting a signal, but we weren't getting fuel. We were able to start the motor on almost like an ether spray. It fired up just fine for 1 or 2 seconds. So we knew it was a fueling issue. We knew the injectors were getting signal. They just weren't letting fuel into the system. So next best thing is we had to change the injectors. The other thing is, if you listen to the video that just happened on the cranking, you can hear that in the first crank, the motor cranks strong. In the second set of cranking, the motor cranks a little bit weak. In the third set of cranking, it cranks strong again. That kind of identifies a problem later on. Is once I changed the injectors, which you guys will see in time lapse in just a second, it turned out that the starter was bad. It was a newer starter, but it wasn't cranking consistently, and then it just quit on me. So I had to also change the starter. So you're going to see that in time lapse. And when we come back from this next set of time lapse, we're going to have brand new injectors in the car and a newer to us used starter, because it was something I can get pretty quick to keep this filming going. And so let's jump right into that. Solid attempt number 2. Soft attempt number 3,452. See how we go. Now remember how I said the more investigating or the more fooling around you do to try and find a problem, the more opportunity you're going to open up for other issues to arise. Once we had pinpointed the fuel injectors and I had to change out the starter, in order to get to that point we had to check a bunch of things, and doing so I forgot one thing, which led to the next video. Alright, attempt number 3. I found a plug on the fuse box that I didn't have plugged in, so stupid me. Oh! Yeah! Woo! Oh, yeah, baby. Oh, okay. I don't want to run too long because I don't have the power steering situation. But sweet! Now what I meant by that was, if you've been watching this series from the beginning, you'll remember that originally when this was a turbo diesel, the power steering rack was looped, and I went ahead and installed all of new power steering lines and all that sort of stuff to unloop the power steering to allow it to now be a proper power steering car. The owner had forgot to mention that this rack had a very bad leak, and he wasn't kidding. In the last episode, when I went to fill everything, I filled the power steering fluid thinking, well, if I'm using the power steering, maybe it's going to leak a little bit. Wrong. The power steering fluid immediately leaked all over my floor from that rack, and which means that I no longer have any fluid in the power steering system, and because I don't want to ruin this VR6 power steering pump. So I'm not going to run it for very long, because in next episode, before we are able to take this car out of the garage, run it through some heat cycles, we still do need to do that brake upgrade that we talked about, as well as we're going to have to throw in a new power steering rack for us to really be able to run this engine. Here is the new rack. Here is the new brakes. This is Corrado G60 11-inch stuff, so we're going to throw all that in. A couple new bits on the braking system, and then this car will be ready to go back to its owner after I take care of a couple more smaller things, which I'm going to do off camera. Again, put the ECU in the car. I need to put back together some of the dash stuff that I took apart earlier, put the rain tray back in, and kind of do some small fiddling around. But this car now runs, and just for fun, let's start it one more time. Love it. All right, that about does it for this week, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If this week goes to show you anything, it goes to show you that you got to stick with your builds, and they are pretty much going to guarantee you some frustration, but power through it. Great things will happen. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Again, stay tuned until next episode when we throw in some new brakes, fix that power steering rack, and finally be able to test this car. Till next time, take care.